Alrighty. Hello, Sarah. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you, Sonata?
I am also good. Thank you for asking. So, you may or may not know this, but when I have a new person on the podcast, I ask a question similar to this one. And it is today, it'll be what is the Lord teaching you right now? And what makes you believe that?
God is taking me through some intense health struggles right now and
Mm,
was recently diagnosed with Lyme's disease and
wow.
Hashimoto's. And I've had health issues for a long time, but these diagnoses have really made it real and really shown me that I need some real answers. And God has really, through that, but also some other life circumstances, just shown me that He desires intimacy with me.
Mm,
And I think I can often see God in a vending machine relationship where I go to him when I need something. And when he wants to fellowship with me, he wants to sit with me, he wants to sit with those emotions that I have about my frustrations with my health or my questions about why he's allowing this to happen to me at this point in my life and my career, and when I have all these dreams and things I want to accomplish. So that's been a big theme recently, is just I also desire more intimacy with God. And it's funny how the one thing we know that brings us peace and help and encouragement is the one thing that we really struggle with, is just kind of being calm and still before the Lord, allowing him to speak to us. So that's been a big theme.
yeah, that's really good. And I think it kind of sucks to say this, but like this is the reality that when we're really going through the hardest things, we feel closest to him. Like it's the thing that
Yeah.
draws us closest to him. So it's like we wish these things didn't happen, but also at the same time, it allows us to be close to God. So it's like,
I know. It's just like, maybe if I can learn my lesson this time, then I won't get all of the crazy trials in the future.
and you know
I
what?
figured
That's
you out,
probably,
God.
yeah, it's probably not going to even happen that way. He's going to find another way
Yes,
on this side of
totally.
on this side of heaven. But yeah, that is a beautiful way to look at it. So, yeah, tell the people who you are. Who are you? Why are you here?
Well, my name is Sarah, and I live in Tampa, Florida at the moment. My husband and I are about to make an exciting move to Nashville, Tennessee to pursue a music career and just kind of head after that full tilt. I've been doing music for a long time, but really feel like God is calling very strongly into this new season of being intentional with music. And why I'm here is I connected with you on social media, and we have very similar passions about just Christian living and honest conversations about mental health, about sexuality, about coming maybe from conservative Christian backgrounds and now facing the realities of marriage and, I wouldn't say disillusionment, but just adjusted expectations when heading into a different season of life, when God does bring the right person. And then you think, you've grown up watching Pride and Prejudice, where all of the movies end at the wedding scene. They don't actually take you into the first couple months of Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth learning how to live as a happy married couple.
hmm
And so those themes have been very dear to my heart, as well as the mental health topics. And I have had a lifelong struggle with obsessive compulsive disorder. And it's so exciting that you're actually a licensed therapist. To have a conversation with someone who is a licensed therapist is so wonderful, because I know you understand to even a deeper level than a lot
Mm.
of people that I've talked to about it. And I think that's just so valuable, especially as a Christian. But God has really taken me through some intense battles with that. And for years, I didn't know what I was actually struggling with. I thought I was just a terrible Christian because my
Mm.
struggles with intrusive thoughts were beyond what I would say. I hate using the word the normal person, but maybe the person who doesn't struggle with OCD or mental health disorder would, the intensity that they might experience, it was just infinitely more anxiety inducing. And for years I thought I just must be crazy. I must be a weirdo. And after many different spiritual investigations and confessing sins, that
Mm.
I thought maybe I'm struggling with these what I didn't know was OCD symptoms. Maybe if I just confessed some sin or had a demon rebuked away from me, maybe I would finally find relief. And that didn't happen. And God finally showed me, it was actually only about 4 years ago, that what I was struggling with was OCD. And that it's just been an amazing upward journey since then, to go from 4 years ago living with my parents, literally sleeping in their bedroom
Mm,
because I was so bad off. I was at risk of hurting myself and almost about to be committed to a mental health
mm,
facility, just because my parents were at their wits end and I was at my wits end. And so God was so gracious to show me what it really was, that it was a struggle with OCD. And that's a whole other conversation, just how I kind of came to that realization and the different symptoms I was experiencing. But a lot of compulsive behaviors that even people within the Christian community could just say, "Oh, that's just a spiritual problem." If you wouldn't
yeah.
obsessively doubt your faith or your salvation if you truly had a strong walk with God.
Mm,
And so, yeah, that's a huge part of my story. But so excited to be here to talk about mental health and marriage and sexuality and OCD and all the things. Because as we know
right.
in life, they often intersect and they're all
Mm-hmm.
twisted together and connect. And even just
Yes.
seeing how OCD's impacted my relationship with my husband, relationship
Mm-hmm.
OCD was a new animal to deal with at one
Mm.
point in my life. But thank God he's really helped me through that. So,
Yeah, that's awesome. And when you said like when I got the OCD diagnosis, it was uphill from there. I think some of my clients are like, "Oh my gosh, I was so glad when I knew that I could call it something."
hmm
Like it some people
yeah.
might think like, "Oh, you're excited that you have OCD." No, like I just am glad that I know what I'm experiencing now. I'm not crazy anymore. So,
Yeah,
I can definitely
totally.
understand that. Um
hmm
but yeah, so we'll get into all that. I want to start first with um, what was the earliest conversation you had about sex and sexuality with like a parent or a guardian, maybe even a friend or whatever?
Yeah. Gosh, well, it gets a little foggy back in the childhood. I
Mm,
seriously don't have a great memory, and again, that could be due to health issues. But I do remember having a conversation with my mom. She actually homeschooled us when
okay.
we were kids, so we didn't have your traditional public school education where they probably had a module about sex and how the body worked.
Yeah, and
So
that wasn't even the
she was
greatest.
our
So
resource, right?
you didn't miss out on
Um,
too much. So
Probably not, to be honest, especially these days.
yeah.
So I remember her giving us like an anatomy lesson about how sex worked, and it was very just scientific and, oh, okay, that's interesting.
hmm
And actually used to think babies came out of the belly button. I mean, it makes sense.
I was
So,
right there with you. So
you know. So, but a lot, I would say we rarely talked about sex. So there was that conversation. There were a few other probably small conversations about it here and there. Obviously, when I had my period, that was another conversation.
hmm
But I kind of, without really having the internet as a child, thank God, probably saved me from a lot of difficulty. I remember
mm,
getting like I think the American Girl Association had a book about the body and how it worked and everything. And I remember reading that book and getting my education from various literary sources as well as
hmm
my mom. But yeah, it wasn't it was not something that we felt was a comfortable subject to
hmm
discuss in our family. Not because it was shameful, but it's awkward and it wasn't a common conversation.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why I like asking this question because I just need people to really know these conversations are not happening. this is like
Yeah.
this is like my plea for people to understand. Like, there is a reason. I'm telling you, there's a reason for this podcast. Like, and this is why. there are
Yeah.
people like I there was an adult that I was speaking to recently, and she was saying like she's like older, well, actually closer to our age, but um she was saying like I've never heard purity explained that way, and
Hmm.
why?
Yeah.
Why? Why have you someone that's older than me never hear purity explained the way that I've explained it? So this is a needed
Yeah.
conversation. So
It
to
is.
kind of
And kids are curious. So if you're
yes.
not talking to them about it, they're going to find out. I managed to find out things
Mhm.
because I investigated, and I was a kid that didn't have a device. I had an old computer in my dad's office that was this big,
Mhm.
so it was library books, but I remember being so curious about it and just interested in it because also it being a taboo subject or a subject you don't really talk about very often, naturally you're going to want to know everything about it.
Exactly. Yes, there's a natural curiosity about sex for most humans. So, yes, that is my spiel. But to pivot from parents to church, what conversations do you feel like you were having at church? Because I know in one of your TikToks you said like you felt like marriage was like the sexual mecca. So, where did you get that understanding from?
Oh, so that was never preached to me, thank God. But that was more the you're left to make a lot of assumptions about sex when you're
Mhm.
not told about it. So the assumptions can either be very good based on your trauma, or very, very bad based on your trauma or experiences, maybe abuse or whatever. Or in my case, of someone who didn't have abuse, who had a relatively clean slate, oh, surely it's amazing
Mhm.
view of it. I was only left to assume that it would just be butterflies and rainbows and everything would be great, especially if, oh, surely if there's no adultery or there's no pornography or whatever, everything's gonna be great.
Mhm.
So I think, and I was in a very conservative church environment for my most foundational years, from I would
Okay.
say 12 to 17. It was, think of the Duggars. It was that vibe. Maybe even
Okay.
more conservative because our pastor didn't even encourage sending girls off. Like the Duggars went to like girls' retreats and stuff, which
Mhm.
we were actually a part of the homeschool organization. On top of that church being the way it was, we were also a part of the homeschool organization that the Duggars were part of. So
Huh.
we had the conservatism and the hush hush about sexual topics on both sides.
Mm.
So it was not the only time you would hear it, anything about sex being mentioned in church really would mostly err on the side of, oh, here's a sermon and we're going to talk about Sodom and Gomorrah and how
Mm.
sexually perverted they were, or here's, I don't know, just sermons mentioning unfaithfulness or promiscuity, and warning you to stay away from those things. So on the one hand, it wasn't taught to be icky, but on the other hand, it was just under lock and key.
Mhm.
And I mean, I should have assumed that there was a lot of sex happening because our pastor had 14 kids.
Oh, wow.
So, like, I
That
mean,
is a lot
that
of
could have,
humans.
I know. Well, our church, that, like, I remember one of my best friends' family, they had 7 girls and 1 boy, and then another family had 5 kids, and it was a church of a lot of procreation happening. So it's funny to me how maybe in the women's Bible studies that I was not a part of, I'm sure they were talking about things where one woman would get together with another woman and probably have honest conversations in some way.
Mhm.
But, again, erring on the conservative side of things, I wouldn't doubt that a lot of it would gear more towards the woman meeting the man's needs, as
Yeah.
it was kind of more of a patriarchal type situation. So I wouldn't
Yeah.
doubt that maybe some of those conversations were skewed in that way.
Mhm. Yeah, so when do you feel like you were able to shed that belief, and like how did that even happen for you?
It was not a sudden thing. It was years of, I think my the impact for me was less, I would say, like purity culture impact, and more so seeing God as not being maybe so strict and rule following being an emphasis in my relationship with
Mhm.
the Lord. Like I think it was more just a holistic coming away from rules focused religion
Mhm.
to maybe more focus on relationship, even though, thank God, even in that church we were taught a lot of wonderful things about, God's love and his kindness, but it was an emphasis on outward appearance and all of that. So I would say there were some things that were challenged, as in I never kissed anyone until I was, oh gosh, my first kiss was, I was 27. 26? No,
Wow.
27. So, you know, but for my personality, that wasn't a big deal. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there were a lot of people that just kind of went the opposite direction because they had
Mm-hmm.
been really repressed or hurt or whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
thankfully for me, that wasn't my experience. I think probably the impact for me personally the most has been the fact that I wasn't maybe as prepared from that church environment for the realities of marriage and how to struggle through different physical intimacy issues or
Mm.
baggage or working through hurt. However, there was a Christian ministry that I got involved with a family that was actually in that same Duggar homeschool organization,
Mm.
but they came out of that and they also saw that there was some harm there, and they started their own ministry on, it's called Whatever It Takes Ministries. They're amazing. They help people break free of sexual bondage and they do marriage
Awesome.
conferences. There's often a lot of reconciliation between husbands and wives where maybe the husbands have had porn issues or adultery and they're able to reconcile through that and have, you know, deep inner work done to figure out why and belief systems and all that. So being a part of that ministry and going to the singles conferences, many of them, I was able to see a lot of the reality of broken marriages and hurt that can come from your singlehood into your marriage and how that's something that you have to work through, and it's not just going to be all perfect even if you're a Christian, you know. It's
Mm-hmm.
so I'm grateful for that experience through that ministry. That really helped.
Yeah. And how long were you? It's like a weird question, but how long were you single before you got married? I don't know how to how to ask that, but like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. So I had
I
dated
guess
off
when
and
did you get
on
married? I
throughout.
guess that might be.
I got,
I don't know.
okay. Yeah. I got married when I was 28 and my
Okay.
husband and I through we met just before COVID started. So it
Okay.
was February of 2020. We went on our first date and we had
Okay.
met on a dating app called Bumble,
Okay.
and I had tried out various dating apps and dating websites, and I had rage quit some of them, you know, like, oh, I'll start it and then I'll delete my
Yep,
account
that is
or
very
whatever. I'm
common.
not paying that subscription fee anymore after this doofus just ghosted me or whatever. So then we ended up meeting and then the world shut down. So that was pretty fun. But we got engaged after about 6 months of dating and then got married
Wow.
after
So
about
so in the
seven
middle of
months.
COVID?
We got married in March of 21.
Okay.
So it was
Okay.
still kind of COVID-y,
Mm-hmm.
but being in Florida, the restrictions were a little bit lighter.
Yes.
So, yeah. But throughout the years, I had only had the longest relationship I had had was 4 months. And I would say I'm a pretty quick decision maker. So
Mm-hmm.
it didn't take long for me in a relationship to figure out if the relationship was going to be viable. And I just didn't really like wasting time. So I would just, you know, either they would call it off or I would call it off and we'd move on. So,
Yeah, I'm the same way. My friends are like, I know after the first date, and people are like, "You didn't want to give him a second
right?
chance." If I already know, what am I gonna? I'm wasting his money.
Don't waste his time either, yeah, or his money.
Exactly.
Which I think does tend to kind of mess you up a little because it is hard, like, to go from not really being in the rhythm with someone in a relationship, from not having dated someone longer than 4 months. And that was a long distance relationship. So I didn't even quite
Okay.
experience daily life and preferences and, oh, here's how we adjust our schedule for each other, or, you know, just all the things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that was a bigger learning curve for me in marriage. But you either learn it when you're dating or you learn it when you're married. So it's not like you're not going to learn. It's just delayed learning.
Exactly. I think
So,
I think people try to prepare so much before marriage, which is important, and you need to make sure you're with a good enough person,
right.
someone who loves the Lord, right? But at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the day, people think, oh, if I cohabitate, then I'll know how he lives. If we do this, then I'll know
Mm-hmm.
this. But you're always going to be caught off guard by different things, and it's
Mm-hmm.
a part of sanctification. I think when you
Oh,
commit
yeah.
yourself to somebody, and then you have to work on that and stay with them. That is true
Mm-hmm.
sanctification right there.
Honestly, it's been wonderful, but it has been the hardest thing.
Mm.
Very
Yeah.
hard. Just because we're both and I'm also convinced this is totally a bunny trail. I'm convinced that a lot of couples actually have it really easy in their
Mm.
relationship. And it's not their fault or it's not their because of their hard work necessarily. It's because of their personality matching.
Mhm.
This is my personal opinion. I could be totally wrong here. For instance, my brother and sister-in-law, they just get along famously all the time, like barely ever disagree. I mean, it's freaky, and that messed me up mentally to then
Mm.
marry my strong opinioned, husband, and then I'm very strong opinioned. And I
Mhm.
love the fact that there's so many pros to how we're matched because we get stuff done. We make quick decisions. Like we do think the same about literally almost everything. So there's so many pros to it. It's not like I'm saying, oh, this is a terrible match.
Right.
But I think certain personality matches make things a lot more just naturally, maybe not have as many things to work through, but
Mhm.
it doesn't mean that you're wrong for each other if you tend to have to work through more situations with someone versus somebody else,
Yeah.
So
That
that's
is really
that's my
helpful though.
personal opinion.
Yeah,
And I
no.
know a lot of
I
people would disagree and say, "Oh, you're just covering for it being a bad match." Listen,
I don't
some of the best
disagree.
things some of the, okay, good. But some of the best things in life you have to really work hard for, and it does get easier as you again, if I had known Steven for 5 years, maybe we would have worked all these little, learning how to read his emotions or how to let him
Mhm.
speak when I want to dominate, or just all these little nuances that then create situations we have to work through. And we didn't have that. God didn't have that for us to be dating for 5 years, so we're kind of figuring those things out now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's really helpful for people to hear. That's really helpful for people to hear. Like I think a lot of the time people base their desire for marriage or their dislike for marriage on what they've seen in other people's relationships. So
Yes.
you have no clue what your relationship will look like. You guys could have a beautiful relationship where you argue twice your whole marriage, and that's just how it is for you guys, or you will
Hmm.
struggle to see eye to eye for maybe the first 2 years, and then you guys are smooth sailing after that. You never
Right.
know. So you never want to base your relationship off of what you see out there. Even though it's hard to do that, you can have a
Right.
completely different experience.
Right. And God, how God works and how God sanctifies us and God's ultimate overarching glory in our life is not just all dependent on how easy our relationship is or how well we think we're matched. Like God's story for us is so much bigger than that. And what he's doing in my
Yes.
life isn't what he's doing in my brother and sister-in-law's life. In fact, they're young, their first baby. And it's funny because, you could look at their relationship and be like, oh my gosh, they have it so easy. They're just so amiable with each other. They almost lost their first child. She had a
Mm,
10% chance of survival. She was a
wow.
micro preemie, like literally this small. I mean, it was incredibly traumatic. And
Wow.
I'm sure that they still have effects from that, just even personally and emotionally. And God let them go through that. That may not ever be my experience, but they could be tempted to look. And if I happen to have healthy pregnancies in the future, they could think, well, why would God let that situation happen or not happen to Sarah? And I could be looking at their situation thinking, wow, they seem to just never argue in their marriage. What's wrong with me? We can compare out the wazoo, but ultimately,
Hmm.
what is God doing? And anybody, you could match anybody. And if regardless if they have the same Enneagram, if they have opposite Enneagram,
Hmm.
whatever, if they are submitted to the Lord and they're both committed to humility and to kindness and working through issues, I mean, gosh, you can get through
They,
anything.
yeah.
You really
Yeah.
can. There's
Hmm.
better matched people out there who don't know how to work through issues, or better matched. You know what I mean? People who are both incredibly phlegmatic and maybe they never argue, but yet
Hmm.
they can't work through stuff. So God ultimately has the final say of who's right for who.
Yeah. And that's something that actually like the Lord kind of helped me understand. I think it was yesterday, if I remember correctly. But
Hmm.
like marriage is the gift, right? And
Hmm.
so your gift of marriage might look completely different than someone else's gift of marriage. It's separate from the person. So if you look at it that way, like marriage is the gift, and
Hmm.
your gift, when laid on your relationship, might look completely different than when it's laid on someone else's relationship. So hopefully
Yeah.
that is helpful as
That's
well.
cool. Yeah. I like that
Yeah,
perspective.
I appreciate that. That was the Holy Spirit, so I'm not going to take credit for that. um. So yeah. So we'll continue. So how long have you been married by now?
We have been married. We just celebrated our 2-year anniversary.
Okay. Look at you guys.
I
Wow.
know we made it.
Look at you. Okay. Perfect. So 2 years. What do you feel like has been like the biggest thing you've learned in 2 years so far?
Mm, that I am not a nice person.
You're human.
That is
Who
not
would have
profound at
thought?
all. I know. Uh like God has so much work to do on me. And
Mm,
it has tested my flesh, like realizing that being an independent female and
mm,
actually having a pretty good life as an independent female, really wanted to be married, really wanted that relationship, that closeness, and I knew that that's what I wanted for my life. uh there are a lot of things about singlehood that insulate you from a lot of growth. Not that you can't still
mm,
grow, not that you can't, like, God has growth for you in the singlehood, and God has additional growth for you in marriage.
mm-hmm,
But um there's a lot of ugliness in me that has come out through
mm,
marriage, and I am grateful for that work of the Lord, because you do get tested and your endurance does get tested, and you think, man, do I need to just I'm a little more selfish than I thought I was,
mm,
and I think that's one of the biggest things, is just the reality of my humanness. And there's no profound statement to say out of that, other than um it is good for God to just kind of open those closets in your heart and be like,
mm-hmm.
okay, we're cleaning this out. And it has been very sanctifying. And it's true when they all say, oh, marriage will sanctify you. It's like, yeah, okay, whatever. It does. It does happen.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate you sharing that because, yeah, like you said, singleness coming into a marriage when you enjoyed your singleness too, I can see how that'd be hard. Like
Yeah.
you were having a great time before you were being convicted of how you treat people, or like cornered into having to deal with the things that
Hmm.
you were able to avoid being in singleness because you weren't with people 24/7.
Yeah, I
um
didn't have to share a room or have different
right,
standards of, like, hey, I'll clean this, you clean that. It's just like I just
right.
deal with my own crap and we're good.
Yeah, yeah. And that, I think that really speaks to single women and men right now too. Like, look at your season and be grateful for what you have right now because it
Hmm.
may not look the same when you're married. You may
Yeah.
have to compromise it in certain ways that you really love being in your singleness. That might look completely different when you're married. So be
Yeah.
grateful
And then,
for where you're at.
yeah. And I think that in the peak of my singleness, perhaps if you had caught me in a frustrating season, if I had heard someone like me who had been married say, like, oh, marriage is really hard, you singles better be grateful, I would have been like, psh, be quiet. You don't know what you're saying because you're married. You
Right.
must be, you're able to say, or you're saying something like that, but you're be so ignorant or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I now see that singleness is hard and marriage is hard. We
Yes.
all get to experience hard
Mm-hmm.
things.
Mm-hmm.
Singleness is wonderful, marriage is wonderful. There are pros and cons to everything, and I love my
Yeah.
husband, and I love the fact that God knew that my life needed him, and I don't mean that selfishly, but his life also needed me, for
Mm-hmm.
us to take the next step in our accomplishing God's will for our lives. Just like
Mm-hmm.
singleness was a step in a season to accomplishing a particular season of God's will for my life and for his life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a blip on the timeline. We're just moving forward. God shifts circumstances. There might be a day where we have kids, or I pass away, or he passes away, and all of a sudden our circumstances look different, but God
Mm-hmm.
knows, and God knows what we need. Um and I'm grateful for all the years that I was single, because, man, I did some really fun stuff and made some really cool
Mm.
friends, and it was awesome. And I'm super grateful to be married, and I do really
Yeah.
fun stuff with my husband, and we love traveling, we love ministering together. Like, it's so cool to be able to do that with somebody and, have a built-in best friend, so to speak, that's your roommate, that you don't have to worry, if they're going to get married off and move out next year. Like, I remember
Yeah.
having all these roommates getting married and moving out, and it was like, oh my gosh, I'm alone.
Yeah, that's real.
you
That's
know
real.
oh yeah, it's tough.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's nice because you're not too far removed from singleness to speak on both
Mhm.
experiences. Like you can
Mhm.
say like I enjoyed being single. And I don't really hear a lot of married people say that, but I think it's also because maybe they weren't as close to singleness as you are maybe. Because like it's cool to hear that you can say in marriage I enjoyed my singleness. I had a great time there, but I'm also having a great time here.
Mhm.
That's really helpful.
Yeah. I think the difference was I'm a very social person, and I always lived with people. I had roommates that I really enjoyed for the most part. If you're listening to this, don't hate me. And I lived with my parents for many years. And even
Mhm.
when I moved back, like I was in Nashville for a few years and then moved back in with them for a couple years before I got married. Like I was sleeping in the same bedroom as my little brother, literally like days before I got married. It was really funny.
Wow.
Um, but like we all need community. God built us that way. And we
Mhm.
feel the sting of loneliness when we don't. And I think it's really, really hard. And I think singleness would have been a lot harder for me if I had lived alone and if I hadn't had good community. So I
Yeah.
think that adds to the sting of it. Just like if you were married and you were struggling in your relationship with your husband and you had nobody to pour into you, no one to advise you, that would be equally pain. It would make the burden harder. So
Yes.
God gives us people and circumstances that can help us in the pain of that season. And that doesn't mean that even if you love your parents and you're all living together, so you have that community, you're not going to still be up at night thinking, man, I wish, I'm going to another wedding tomorrow and it's not me.
Mhm.
I wish I
Mhm.
was with somebody, but still there's ways that God eases that burden.
Yeah. That is really good. Yeah. So so moving into like talking about maybe burden might not be the best word, but how do you feel like your mental health has affected your marriage as a whole, individually, and then also, I guess, your husband and your marriage as by itself, I guess. That kind of sounds weird, but
Mhm.
like your
No, that
relationship, I
makes
guess.
sense. Yeah. Um I would say generally speaking, it has affected it significantly, and I think my husband would agree. I've I've had a lot of health issues that I do believe are at the root of my mental health struggles.
Okay.
And when I'm fatigued, when I'm not feeling well, I tend to get cranky,
Mm,
cranky and just down and not motivated. My husband's very fun loving. He's very high energy. And so I think it wears on him when I'm not at that same place. And I want to be at the same place, just like my body is dragging along.
mhm,
And his personality too is he can take on sometimes emotionally like what other people might be going through,
mm,
which is a great quality of empathy. But we've had to discuss that where, I've said, hey, I really need you to be strong for me. And I don't want to bring you down with my feelings. But when I'm down, it's really hard if you're also down too, because then you're down because I'm down and you're kind of taking
mm,
that on. You're wanting to empathize, but yet learning how to have strength when one of us is not doing well. And he
yeah.
he barely ever has bad days. He's like Mr. Cheerful, which is super great considering I can be like this.
Mhm,
And I will say specifically, it has been difficult with the OCD because he really had no clue what it was other than a stereotype, probably of like, oh, you fix picture frames here and there.
mm,
So that has been hard to explain to him, just like it would be hard to explain to anybody who doesn't understand. I mean, there was a point in my life where I had no clue what OCD was. And even though I was experiencing it without knowing it.
yeah.
So figuring out how to that's been a difficult journey to walk, of trying to help him understand while also wanting his validation. Where if I have OCD and I meet someone with OCD, I'm like, oh my gosh, I know the lingo. Immediately, I know I'm not going to take what you just said seriously because I know that's an obsession or whatever, kind of navigating it because I'm experienced with it, whereas
Mhm.
he's not experienced with it, but he's learning about it.
Mm.
It can be tough for him to be able to know how to interact with me about it, or maybe not take it as seriously. Um, that's been difficult. Take it
Yeah.
seriously as in, hey, I know you're not feeling well. You sound like you're maybe obsessing about something. It's not really, it
Mhm.
shouldn't be that big of a deal. Let's just kind of,
Mhm.
bring it down. He's learning.
Okay.
But he's
Yeah,
had a
and it's
great
only been 2
he's
years,
had a
so
great right. And it's
Mhm.
hard. OCD is
Mhm.
weird and unique, and it's
Mhm.
not for the faint of heart. So, God bless him. He's trying, and he's trying to learn. And I think the difficulty is when the OCD can involve him with relationship
Mm.
OCD.
Mhm.
And that's not, I, there was a time when it was, maybe it can be more pronounced than other times.
Yeah.
But when it involves him, it's like, oh, did I marry the right person or whatever? And it can be triggered if we're going through a difficulty, then I can get fearful and think, maybe I made the wrong choice. And,
Mhm.
maybe we weren't good personalities for each other or something. And then that can become a fear and an obsession. So it can be hard for him when that then becomes, a
Yeah, that makes
theme.
sense.
So that's been fun to navigate as well.
So, when did you let him know? Was this, like, in dating that you let him know, or was it
hmm
after you guys were engaged, after you guys got married?
Yeah, it was while we were dating, and I just said, "Hey, just letting you know, I struggle with this," and I kind of wanted him to have full disclosure, so to speak, even though it's kind of hard to sum up everything that you struggle with in just a conversation. But it was
Mhm.
definitely something that I was open with him about and wanted him to know, because it's not for the faint of heart. And I think at the time he didn't fully understand the scope of the impact of that. And he was very kind and very understanding, and he actually has a brother who has struggled with some severe mental health
Mm.
issues. So he was like, I'm made for this, to help you in this way.
Mm.
And that was really encouraging for me to hear that from him, that he, God even had prepared him through what his brother had gone through,
Wow.
to have compassion and to understand, to be okay with that because of his
Mhm.
history and his family.
Yeah. I think that's so important to let people know as you're dating, and you well, not too soon, right? Because you don't wanna just, like, tell
hmm
anyone who doesn't deserve to hear about
yeah.
your experiences. But if you
hmm
actually think this person's gonna be in your life for the rest of your life, like, you think that's gonna actually happen, it's important to have that
hmm
conversation in dating. I understand that it might be nerve-wracking, that you'll think that it'll ruin the relationship, or they'll have to second guess being with you,
hmm
but you'd rather
Yeah.
someone have that thought process, before it's affecting your dating relationship, or your marriage. So
Yeah.
make sure you are
It
having
just
that conversation.
similarly, yeah. And another difficult question to kind of tie some of these things together from my end is, we had a conversation about porn
Mm,
early
okay.
on, and sexual past. And because I knew that was something we needed to get out in the open,
Mhm.
that was important for us to discuss. And I really feel like questions around sexual baggage or bondage or history are best done early in the dating relationship, because number one, it
Yes.
tells you a lot about where they're at currently. You can totally tell by their responses. Well, not always if people are good at hiding, but you can often tell kind of where they're at, if they're still into stuff,
Right.
if they're over whoever they were sleeping with in the past
Mhm.
relationship or whatever. And so we just kind of got it all out there. I told him that I had struggled with pornography as well, and he told me that he had struggled with it as well, and we were able to just get that out in the open and
Mhm.
become accountability for each other early on. And he ended up going to a men's retreat, and really digging deep as to the why behind his porn addiction, and really being able to go through a lot of his past. And he sat me down after that, and with fear and trembling told me like almost his whole history with sexual
Wow.
mishaps.
Mm.
And just we were able to kind of grieve through that together and work through that. And at least I kind of understood things that he had gone through. He had been sexually assaulted, and it was just a
Mm.
lot of things that needed to come out in the open. But that was so important for us,
Yeah.
to have not only just, hey, here's the mental health struggle, here's everything out on the table, and
Yes.
you can back out if you want to, but neither of us did, which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah. Yeah. That is another very important conversation. And if you guys even need to, like, pull them together, mental health and your sexual past, let it be a whole conversation. You guys can sit out and
Oh
just,
yeah.
like, just
just get it
just
all
get
out.
at it,
Throw in some generational trauma there, or
Right. Why not?
generational curses. Why not?
Right. Why not? Why not? But I think the point you made, it really does show you someone's character. Every time that I've told
Mhm.
a man that I'm
Yeah.
waiting till marriage, it has showed me who they are
Oh, you
quickly.
can, and even if you're discerning, you can tell by kind of how they react after
Yeah.
that. If he's a man of God, he's going to be enthusiastic about that.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to
Exactly.
be like, this is the woman I have been waiting for. And if he's
Exactly.
not, he's going to be hesitant, or he's going to be
Mm-hmm.
weird or hostile about that.
Yes. Or make
It's
excuses.
Oh yeah. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
so for literally just kind of throwing these type of questions out there early on, even on the first date. Why not?
Yeah.
Because if you don't want to waste your time, literally you can
Mm-hmm.
tell so much by just putting those out there, saying, listen,
Yeah.
I'm serious, I'm dating to marry, and these are some very
Mm-hmm.
important things to me. And if a guy is worthy of that and worthy of you, he will get into it with you. And he'll say, all
Mm-hmm.
right, let's roll up our sleeves, let's talk about it. Let's
Right.
get into it. That's a man that you can trust with your future.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And I know some of you might have heard her say, first date. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah,
Now, we're
literally.
not telling you to tell them your deepest, darkest secret, what happened to you when you were a child or the depths of
Mm-hmm.
your mental health issue. But the conversations about sex, about mental health, should be started on as early as possible, because it
Mm-hmm.
tells you where they're at with that. And if you feel like this
Yeah.
person is, like, making excuses for maybe having sex with someone a week ago, or getting
Mm-hmm.
drunk with their friends on their birthday that happened last month, and they're making excuses for that behavior, and not having a repentant heart, that is a red flag. And you can see that
Right.
early on and get out of there. So,
Yeah. And that doesn't mean that even if it was a recent offense, that they're automatically off the table. That
right.
doesn't mean that. It just
Hmm.
means that you'll be able to discern where their heart is at, and you'll know that you're going to have some stuff to work through and some trust to even rebuild early on.
Right. And
So,
where's
yeah.
their heart at when they explain that to you? If they're like, it was just a crazy night or whatever. I mean, I was with the boys, like, that's
Yeah.
not a repentant heart.
No.
That is not a
No.
repentant heart.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Which
But also, go
sidebar
ahead.
on that, one of the best questions I think you can ask is, what were your boundaries, physical boundaries in past relationships? Or in your
Mm,
last, just narrow it down to your last relationship, because that's going to actually have them admit if there were, or there, that's a very straightforward question. And
mhm.
it's not accusatory, like, um, did you sleep with someone in your last relationship?
Right.
Just say like, hey, I would love to hear about, you could kind of warm them up by like, what are you looking for in a relationship? Are you ready for a committed relationship? Whatever. And just say like, hey, I'm so curious. I love hearing about this from different people that I talk to, but what were your boundaries, or what are your boundaries in a relationship? And what were your boundaries in your last relationship? I'm so
Mhm.
curious. And you don't have to
Yeah.
be nailing them about it, but that will tell
Right.
you a lot.
Sure will. So, I also was wondering, because I know you're saying you had a porn addiction as well. How did that exist at the same time as your OCD? How did that work?
Hmm. So I wouldn't, they definitely existed at the same time. I
Mhm.
wouldn't say that they necessarily affected each other, although I
Okay.
think that the OCD tendency for me to confess very quickly, or like be so obsessed with confessing and clearing my conscience,
Mhm.
would cause me to like immediately like ask God to forgive me, and
Okay.
try to clear the slate with God. And yeah, so I would say that that might have been how it how it affected together.
Okay, so your OCD is more with you and God and not with you and others.
Hmm.
Okay. That makes
Well,
sense.
it encompasses a lot of things like,
Okay.
did I offend this friend? And then you can obsess
Mhm.
about what did I say, or did I upset them or whatever. So it can affect people, but it also is there's a lot of tie-in to my relationship with God.
Okay. Because I was wondering, like, if you are having OCD about confessing, then pornography is a very isolating experience. So I would think
Mhm.
that those two things would have been kind of a hard thing to wrestle with, but it makes sense that you were confessing to God. So it was a little different than you having to confess to
Yeah.
people or people you're in relationship
Right.
with.
Right. And I would definitely say it was an addiction because it happened more than once. It was kind of over the space of the year of like a year.
Okay.
And I was, I wouldn't say I don't want to like minimize it at all. It was on occasion, but it wasn't all the time or,
Mhm.
some very, very frequent thing. But my heart attitude of feeling lonely, of feeling tired of being a late 20s virgin, of feeling kind of fed up with God not letting that happen yet, marriage happen yet, or whatever. Um, I would say definitely played into my motives of wanting physical and emotional intimacy.
Mhm.
And so that overrode, my obsession with a clear conscience was overridden by just this
Grief.
dissatisfaction,
Yeah.
discontentment, grief,
Mhm.
all the things.
Yeah.
And,
Okay.
it's really sad, but um, even my OCD was overcome by those emotions.
Yeah, yeah, and that just shows you like the
So,
depth of it for you.
mhm.
So, how do you feel like you were able to overcome that? Because I have had someone on the podcast, a female on the podcast, to talk about her experience with pornography, but you could have, found a different way out of it. So, I would like to hear, how did you find your way out of that?
Yeah. So it actually was not long after I met. So it was a very brief instance from me, you know, looking at porn and then meeting Steven. It was like maybe
Okay.
a week or something,
Oh, wow.
or more, maybe it's a week and a half. I don't know. It wasn't that
Okay.
long.
Okay.
And so I met Steven, and very shortly after I met him, we had, maybe a couple, like a month in or whatever, um, a conversation about our sexual past and everything. And I was on good behavior at the beginning of our relationship. And I think,
Mhm.
again, that speaks to just the emotional problem that it was like, oh, poor me. I'm not in a relationship.
Mhm.
I'm going to try to get something out of pornography that I don't have in a relationship. So when the relationship came along, it definitely met that need, so to speak. So I
Mhm.
didn't feel like this compelling draw to go look at porn,
Mhm.
which is why it's interesting, like how differently men and women maybe approach porn. It's bad across the board, but even
Mhm.
just our different, how we're wired or what we need. And
Mhm.
so after talking with Steven, not I was still tempted to look at things that I shouldn't look at on occasion after that, but because we had been open with each other, my accountability with him and the knowledge that I would need to tell him if I had looked at
Mhm.
anything bad, and his knowledge that he would need to tell me was so strong. Because
Mhm.
for me, and something that I've learned in my life, accountability is the number one way out of sinful or lazy patterns of life for me
Yeah.
personally,
Mhm.
and maybe many other people, because I really care about what other people think about me. It's a
Mm.
not a great thing. Maybe it is a good thing. It's a good thing for accountability, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's why I have a business coach. That's why I have accountability with my husband. That's why my husband and I, when we made some mistakes in our relationship where we got a little handsy, um, I hate using that term, but you know what I mean. We got a little too
Yes.
close. Um, that being accountable to our premarital counselors was what kept us from doing it again. Like that,
Mm.
boom, that stopped.
Yeah.
And thank God that, we just deep down, I think, knew that that's what we need to do, is be accountable to them. So
Mhm.
thank God that that really, really was strong. And there was one instance where I was watching the Bridgerton TV show, and there was a scene that I watched, and I was like, I should not have watched that scene. That was arousing or whatever. And I confessed that
Mhm.
to Steven. I was like, hey, I
Mhm.
shouldn't have watched this scene. So I was able to then go to him even after that and say, like, hey. And then there was another thing where he was watching some Netflix show was inappropriate, and he told me
Mhm.
about it. And so we were able to continue that with each other. And I think there's certain instances where you maybe shouldn't be accountable to your boyfriend or girlfriend, especially if maybe your struggle was watching porn together or
Mhm.
something like that. There's
Yeah.
certain instances, but in our case, it was actually really helpful. So I think that's a case by case thing. Like, go think about who's the last person you'd want to tell. Go
Yeah.
to them and ask
Yeah.
them to be your accountability.
Yeah, that's that's a good one. And I think the distinction you're making too is if you are struggling sexually with your partner, then you need to find someone else to be accountable with because
Yeah.
I've had clients where they're trying to be each other's accountability, but in that moment you guys both want to have sex. It's not
Right.
going
So
to
how are you
work.
going to be accountable to the person that's part of this problem?
Exactly. You can't do that. So you need to find someone
Yeah.
outside of the relationship to be accountable to. So, what do you think your encouragement to the person who is afraid to be accountable to someone? What would your encouragement be to them?
You're going to feel so good after you get free from it. Like, it's going to be like you're a little lamb skipping in a field of daisies. And it's like you were obese and you shed 300 pounds. I mean, it's going to it's going to be so worth it on the other end, and you just have to believe that. You have to see it, and
Mm.
I think deep down that it would be amazing. So you just got to do it. You got to get over yourself, got to smack yourself around a little bit, and literally like force yourself with trembling fingers to call that person or whatever. And trust me, it's not going to be as bad as you think it is. Like, you think it's going to be this horrible conversation, and maybe they will judge you, and maybe you need to go to somebody else. I don't know. But
Right.
like, it's actually going
Mhm.
to be great. And chances are they've struggled with whatever similar thing you're confessing to them. So it's not that bad.
Yeah,
It hurts, but it's not that bad. And the reward is so great.
definitely. Yeah, I definitely agree. Accountability is needed. And I just, like you said, we need people. Like the Lord put people in our lives for a reason. You're not supposed to walk through these things by yourself. And the devil would love for you to be in isolation with something that's eating at your spirit and
Mm-hmm.
just allowing your flesh to run wild.
Oh,
But
totally. And
go
I
ahead.
promise that if you're sitting there and you're like, well, that's great. She had some godly couple that were counseling them, but we don't. Nobody cares about us, and we
Mm,
don't even have a church that we're going to. Whatever. If you trust the Lord and you ask him to give you accountability, I promise you he will bring you someone
mm-hmm.
or some people. So
Yeah.
don't use that's an excuse. Don't use that as an excuse. If God knows that that's the key to your freedom, and I believe that in most instances it is, then he's going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. So
don't make that excuse.
that is that is safeguarding definitely for sexual sin. Are there any like routines or like check-ins or anything you guys do regarding to mental health to manage that within your marriage?
Within our marriage, I think maybe I check in a little too much. We don't have anything that's a routine or like
Okay.
a catchphrase or anything, although maybe we should, like a code word or something if I'm not doing well. But I would say we have pretty good communication about it, and I feel open to tell him, if I'm not doing well. A lot of times, I I keep a lot of the OCD stuff to myself just because it is so much, and
Mm-hmm.
because I already know the answer to it anyway. It's more so sometimes I just say in general, like, hey, I'm just struggling with some OCD stuff. I also don't want to involve him directly because I know it could really hurt him. And that's something I really should talk to a therapist about if it's relationship OCD raising its head again.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, yeah, I think there's a definitely delicate balance between honesty and knowing what exactly to kind of give to a therapist versus dump on your spouse.
Yes, that is a really good point. That's a really good point. There is a distinction. And I think some people I don't know why I'm thinking of The Bachelor because of this. I don't know if you just saw the past season.
Because it just aired.
Yeah, he was at fault for being way too honest. He had to
Mm-hmm.
think it he needed to think it through and think, how is this going to affect everyone involved?
Mm-hmm.
Do I need to be honest at a different point? Do I need to be honest in a different way? And he did not handle that
Yeah.
well. And there is a reality to that. There honesty, the Lord loves truth. The Lord loves you being honest, but um there are ways to handle it that can be
Mm-hmm.
better than others. So, like you just
Yeah.
said, yes, your OCD is affecting your marriage, but if you
Mm-hmm.
realize me having this conversation with him right now in this way will actually hurt him more and I need to talk to someone else, that is a great alternative. And you can be honest in a different way when you have had time to sit with it and think it through first.
Oh, totally. Totally. And I don't being someone who can be honest blunt to a fault, as in I'm too blunt.
Mm-hmm.
I That's my tendency. I got to learn how to, is this something that they need to know in order to help me? Is this detail? Um, especially if it involves them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that is a really good question to ask as well. So for the person that is nervous about even like telling someone about their mental health issue, what do you think you would tell them? Like maybe they're in dating and they really like this person, they don't want them to run away or leave them. What would you say to that person?
Well, in this case, yes, honesty is the best policy. I think it's fair to them to know at least generally what you go through, and it doesn't mean you have to go through every single little detail, but to invite them into that. Um, it is very important. I think especially if you've struggled with suicidal tendencies, that's a burden. It really takes a special person to be able to handle that. And it's not that it's a bad thing. It's not that you're a bad person. It's just there's unique situations. It'd be like you marrying someone and not realizing they were paralyzed from the waist down or something, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not a bad thing. It's just, I mean, it's uncomfortable, but you got to know, is that a challenge that God has uniquely equipped me to move forward with? So you kind of have to give the transparency there so that you're prepared, and that it doesn't come back to bite you if they say, well, you never told me that. I didn't know it was, it could cause friction later in marriage if they feel like you weren't being honest.
Right. Yeah. And I do just want to add to that, like you never have to trap someone into loving you. That
Oh
is
no.
not
Yeah.
that is not God's plan for you. He will find someone that can handle your experience. He will allow you
Yes.
to be with someone who can handle handle that. So you never have to
Yeah.
trap someone into loving you.
And I will say on that report, I was dating a guy. Actually, I was thinking maybe I would marry him. And this is the 4-month relationship. And again, I know you're like, oh, how would you know that after 4 months? Well, I was really excited about him, and he was perfect. He seemed, there were so many things about him that were so great. And he
Mhm.
actually had mental health struggles himself. He had tried to commit suicide actually.
Mm.
And we were able to connect over those things, but I think God really knew that would have been hard for both of us in a marriage.
Mm. Yeah.
And I actually ended up having a mental breakdown while we were dating and let him in to a lot of the realities of those OCD struggles that I was going through. And I think it was too much for him. And
Mm.
we broke it off. It was mutual because I couldn't handle the relationship at that time with what I was going through. And I think he was also seeing the handwriting there. And I'm so glad. He's a wonderful guy. I wish him the best. Like he's so sweet, but I think, man, that would not have been a good combination.
Mhm.
But then of course that caused some rejection and thinking, it can make you think like, am I broken? Am I too,
Mm.
he left me because of this, or this was too much for him or whatever. And then along a few, if, year and a half later, along comes my husband and tells me, oh, I'm made for this. I'm built for this. Like this is, I can deal with this with you. And
Yeah.
his personality has been so great.
Mhm.
Um, we balance each other out really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I keep saying it's a good point, but you keep making really good points. I don't usually say this every so often in every episode, um, but that is a really good point because, like, um, you may be in a situation where you both have mental health issues, and you're you might need to even go your separate ways or go to therapy because of that. So you guys might need to go a couples therapist, and you don't have to
Yeah.
wait to go to couples therapy until premarital. I'm going to say that
Mm-hmm.
again. You don't
Oh
have to
yeah.
wait to go to couples therapy until premarital. I have a boyfriend and
Right.
girlfriend in therapy right now, and that's beautiful. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a great idea. They're trying to
Oh
figure out,
yeah.
should we get married, and that's beautiful. So that is an option
It's
for you as
better for
well.
them to figure it out now than when they're engaged and they're going to premarital counseling. Yeah, totally. We should
Exactly.
have way more of that.
Exactly. Yes. So this is me giving you permission. If you're in a relationship right now and you're trying to figure out if you want to get married, go to premarital counseling. Um, and that counselor can let you guys know, like, you know what, maybe I need to see this person individually, or you guys
Mm-hmm.
together, and work on this right now. And maybe you guys will realize we're not for each other right now until we can get to a healthier place and come back together and be in a relationship that way. Um,
Totally.
so yeah,
I think
I think
that's
that.
I think that's so important. And again, also remembering that you can't inoculate yourself, you can't counsel yourself out of troubles down the road. It doesn't mean that you're just going to have a guaranteed amazing marriage because you were open and honest about mental health struggles or sexual bondage in the past or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it just makes it so much easier, and it paves the way for a healthy standard of how you're going to deal with issues that will come up down the road. You're setting the
Mm-hmm.
precedent for it, you're setting the expectation. How we attack these things is honesty, openness, accountability, compassion for each other. Those are excellent standards to start off a relationship and a marriage with.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And I think the beautiful thing about this is too, you met a man who literally said, "Let's do this. I was built
Yeah.
for this." What a
Yep.
beautiful thing for people who have mental health issues to hear. Like, you can be met with somebody is who would love to be with you
Mm-hmm.
regardless. Like,
Right.
they feel like, I can do this and I want
Yeah.
you regardless. So I'm so glad
Now
that you said that.
there have been days though where I think he's been probably challenged on that statement where
Oh
he
yeah, I'm
thinks,
sure.
can I handle this? I don't know. And but then again, it's been a growing experience for him, and his strength and his abilities um are growing over time, and what he's able to learn how to interact with, just like me learning how to handle his brokenness and his insecurities and his difficulties and his bad days. We're here to
Mhm.
lift each other up, and that doesn't mean that it's gonna be easy. It's that God knows that we can be strong when the other is weak, and that hopefully our personalities then balance each other out in those ways too.
Mhm. Yeah, and hopefully you guys got good enough sense of humor cuz that's needed in marriage.
Oh yes, we have very very loud and boisterous humors between the two of us.
That's great. Beautiful. Okay, so is there any last words you have to say to the people? Any last advice or anything like that for them?
I would just say, don't spend your time looking for something that you don't have or something that's not in your life yet. Whether you're in marriage, don't be looking at other people's relationships and comparing, because that's something I have done and is a downward spiral and
Mhm.
causes you to be discontent. And don't be in singleness thinking, man, my life will just start and I'll finally be able to do XYZ when I get married or when that person comes. Focus on what God has given you right now, and search for the beauty in it like you're digging for treasure, because there is treasure where you're at, and there are so many things that he has for you in this season. So don't waste energy trying to be in another blip on the timeline, because all we've got is this little timeline. So
Mhm.
enjoy the different sections that you're in, regardless of how long or how short they are.
Yeah, that is really good. I can tell you write songs. You just you do a great job of like creating imagery for people.
Oh,
So,
thanks.
you're welcome. So, where can the people find you?
Well, musically, you can find me on all the streaming platforms. at Sarah Sorenson. That's my name, my full name, and I am on the social medias under a few different usernames. On
Okay.
TikTok, it's at Sarah Soren Songs. I was trying to be cute with my last name.
I see. I see.
SORENSONGS. And then Instagram, it's Sarah Sorenson Music. And Facebook, I'm on there, but it's kind of dying, I think, in a slow death.
Yeah.
And then
If you want to find her.
if you want to find me. And then I have a community that I just launched where I interact with people one-on-one. We talk about OCD, we talk about relationships, Christian encouragement, and you can find that the link for that in my Instagram at Thrive Hive Community. And so that's a place where I interact with people more directly. But yeah,
Really cool.
it's been super fun to be on here and to get to know you a little bit better over the past month or so.
Yeah. You as well. I'm so glad you came on. I know this is going to be really healing for people. So thank you so much. But as you guys know, you can follow the Parallel at the Parallel Pod on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Remember to kiss the sun, speak the truth in love, and I'll be seeing you in a couple of weeks. Bye.